what up, y'all?
Hey.
Pastor V, Crystal,
What's up?
James.
What up, though?
What up, though?
Can I say that?
Yeah, why not? Of course you can.
Hey.
Well, of course we're here because we're doing our preaching collective. Typically we do it a different way, but we are starting a new sermon series coming up for Advent titled Love But Not Forgotten. And I think that's an important little phrase, little title, because many different people tend to be forgotten and feel forgotten. But I mean, there's some particular women in the Bible that kind of get overlooked from time to time. And I think it'd be a good way for us to show how they're loved by God, but ultimately we can see how their lineage is actually links to Christ, and how Jesus comes to this amazing lineage, which is kind of interesting for some of these different stories that are very, very awkward.
Would you argue that it's not only that they're not forgotten, but it almost flips to the other side to where the fact that they're in Christ's lineage almost suggests that they're being honored, right? So they go to a place of almost being like forgotten, overlooked, disdained culturally to, oh, these women might actually be honored.
Yeah.
And there might be some things we even need to learn that we could learn or
Totally.
we need to look at. So
Absolutely. And there's a bunch of different women. We're going to talk about Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Rahab.
Bathsheba's going to be an interesting one, but today we're talking about Tamar.
Rahab,
Yeah.
what?
I think
Wait to get into Rahab.
I think Rahab's going to be probably the most. I don't know. They all have their. We're going to talk about Tamar today, but
Yeah,
I think
Tamar's today.
Tamar's today, but just overall, and all these women show up in the lineage, in the genealogy, of in Matthew, which is just I just think it's interesting. So,
Just dope.
anyways, I'm going to be preaching coming up on Genesis 38 and Matthew 1 and 3. But we're going to just look today at Genesis 38. So how I'm thinking about, I want you all to kind of help me kind of think through it a little bit, because this is a very, very weird, strange, interesting, scandalous passage.
I tell people it reminds me of those Maury Povich talk shows,
yeah.
like
Jerry Springer.
when, like
You are not the
you
father.
are the daddy, right? In the
Exactly.
story, if you haven't read the story, you go to Genesis 38 and check it out. And there's definitely a part where it's basically, and you are the daddy. It feels like that. I mean, it's sort of one of those kind of stories where there's a lot of craziness going on, a lot of baby mamas, and so
Yeah, for sure.
No, it's
So-
wild.
Yeah. So I'm just give it like a kind of like just an outline of the passage.
Sure.
Some of the things I'm thinking through and how to approach it. And then we could just have a conversation about how we can preach this thing.
Dope.
Sound good?
Yep.
So Genesis 38. So yeah, basically the outline is interesting because the narrative in verses 1 through 5 really kind of just open up. And it talks about a guy by the name of Judah marrying somebody, a Canaanite woman, and has 3 sons with this particular Canaanite woman, right? So that's kind of how it opens up. Judah takes a wife, and then Tamar, which is a woman that marries Judah's first son, and his first son is named Er. I think that's how you pronounce it. And then we see typically in these narratives, specifically Old Testament narratives, there's like a crisis or some type of crisis that kind of happens. And I think that we see Tamar's husbands, which happen to be Judah's first and second son, get killed. And they get killed because text says simply that they
God was displeased.
they were wicked in the sight of
Yeah.
the Lord. They were wicked in the sight of Yahweh.
was the first one.
So the first son, was, right? And then after that, in this culture, essentially, basically the son, the brother-in-law takes takes his sister-in-law as the wife. That's like the cultural customs.
Yeah, family lineage is extremely important in that day, particularly for the firstborn.
Right. So her first husband dies. Then the second husband, Onan, is supposed to fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law.
That probably needs to be explained a little bit more, like the responsibility that the next son had to the family to produce children for the sake of the first son.
For the first son.
For the posterity of the first son.
Yeah, or I would say the posterity of the family, and so the lineage goes to the firstborn son if he doesn't have any kids.
Yes.
The second son is not married, so to be clear, like if he's not married, then he's to remember everything's arranged marriages back then, and so it's okay. You're going to marry this. You're going to marry your sister-in-law, and the idea is that the kids that would come from there would then carry on the family name, right, through the firstborn.
Yeah.
And Onan was like, oh yeah, I'll get with her, but I'm not gonna have kids with her.
Right.
So that's pretty much
which also brings up another crisis. Not only that her husbands was killed here in Onan, but she's left childless.
Yeah.
And
because God's displeased with what Onan does, so he dies. Be clear, and then there's still no children, right?
Yeah.
And now there's a third son left, right?
And there's which is So there's a third son left, which. I don't know. I think Judah was kind of just like, yo, like, Tamar, you got something going on with you. 2 of my sons already then died, messing around with you. I ain't letting the third one. You know what I'm saying?
You think that's what he did?
Say.
Well,
Yeah.
Do you think he blames? I don't think he blames Tamar.
I don't
for
think.
it. I don't get.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I get it.
I'm kind of like.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, he just
maybe I'm injecting what I would do. But I was just saying, it is this interesting thing because he does. I believe he does say like, "Yo, like I'm a."
Well,
When he comes of age,
Yeah.
but he never really followed through with it.
Yeah, because he said he feared. This is verse 11. He feared that he would die like his brothers. So he feared that like they would.
The younger brother thought he would die like his brothers.
No, Judah's afraid that his younger son would also die.
Oh.
Maybe do what like either be like and just displease God, or be like Onan, have sex with her and be her husband, but not do anything to produce.
We got to talk about that
Well,
because
then I was about to say, then you can probably argue that there was something that he looked at
There we
her in
go.
some type of way.
There it is.
Okay.
That, well, I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, but how do you see that though? I'm interested in that. Like, Tamar's in a situation. She's married, and that husband's wicked. Who knows what that means?
yeah.
And God kills him. At least that's how they understand it. Like, he's a bad guy, then he dies, and they're like, oh yeah, God did that.
Right.
And then Onan has a responsibility, and he just takes advantage. Just goes, hey man, I just she fine.
I'm going to just get it.
Hey, I'm gonna get in where I fit in, but I'm not trying to commit to nothing like that.
Yeah.
And so God kills him too.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And so then Tamar is like, she's kind of abused in that sense.
Yeah.
Sort of taken advantage of. And then Judah, the father, the guy who's supposed to have the integrity, sort of puts out this sort of like, it doesn't feel false at the time, but almost puts out this, like floater, like, hey, just hold up. My son's young, but when he comes of age, you grown right now. Eventually, we'll take care of you. Help me understand how you read that, because I'm super interested in how how you read something like that.
Yes. How I would do something like that. Like, there's so much stuff in that. And I was talking to John about this. Like, when you consider even Jacob's, like, his pops and what he did. Like the example, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
There's history here.
Wow.
there's a history here. I mean, he wanted Rachel, but then he got Leah. You know what I'm saying? He's a trickster. And
Hold on, Jacob didn't want Leah.
he didn't, but his grandfather tricked him,
Jacob wanted
right?
Rachel.
He wanted
Jacob
Rachel.
wanted Rachel.
That was
Jacob
the
wanted
fine
Rachel,
one.
But
Yes.
Laban
Yes.
tricked him and gave him Leah, right?
Yeah.
Makes the dude 7 years a slave. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, he has to slave for both of his things. So we talking about the history of that. Like, he already has that. Like,
The text says Leah was tough on the eyes.
yeah.
That means she was ugly.
I mean, I wouldn't say that. It
I
sounded
mean,
like.
that tough on. What does tough on the eyes mean, bro?
Did it say tough on the eye? Or it said
I
that
think
something was wrong with her eye.
She was weak. She had weak eyes.
Weak eyes.
Yeah, something was wrong with her eyes.
I've heard both ways though too. I mean, we could argue for that. I've heard it'll make your eyes weak,
Yeah.
or either.
Well, I mean,
Oh.
if you think about, this is, I don't want to go too far on this, but I wonder if in that culture, a lot of time women are covered up. You just see their
Yeah.
eyes.
That's
I'm
interesting.
just thinking from an Eastern perspective. I think we do know, like, when this is true for with Rebecca, that like he first saw her. What's his name? Isaac. Only saw her veiled up, right? And so
Yeah.
I do think eyes are really big in that culture. Anyway,
Yeah. No.
but yeah, there's history
That's an
here.
interesting
There
idea.
is history.
We
there.
seeing people's eyes now in our culture too, because we typically wear masks and all that.
That's
All
true.
right, we going back to.
All right, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, like, I just consider like the history, even with Judah, because Judah's mother was Leah, like in the text. You know what I'm saying? She was the rejected one. She was the one who finally, like, when Jacob, I believe, was her last, or Judah, sorry, was her last son. And he's like, now I'll praise God. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you read it in, I believe it's Genesis 29, if you look at that whole history and how all of that played out, like, there's something in Judah.
That's super
Like,
interesting.
you know what I'm saying? Like,
Wow,
there's
okay.
something
I
you
hadn't thought of
have
that.
to, there's some histories like, man, I watch Pops, like, handle mom. I've seen some things in the house. And then all of a sudden now you're treating this woman in there. Like,
Yeah, like
I'm
I'm
just,
with the,
yeah.
That's deep.
No, for
All
real.
right, that's.
It comes from
Write
somewhere.
that down.
Trauma, bro. Trauma is
Give a little bit of
everywhere.
history.
Wow, that's good.
It's
that's
trauma.
Good. That's good.
No, for real.
That's
It is
wild.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
I hadn't even considered that.
Wow.
So it's like almost like
I hadn't thought about that.
he was born out of transaction before. You know what I'm saying? Like, this was transactional.
So what's
all
sad
of a
is like
sudden,
he's sort of
He's
falling
just
in the same
redoing
path.
the same thing.
boom, yeah.
Trauma.
Wow.
Trauma. Beating
Yeah.
itself.
That's interesting.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, but that's
So yeah,
That is so deep.
so definitely deep. Definitely want to tap into that for sure. So yeah, the crisis, we talked about the childless, as well as, you know, her son dies. But then there's like this rising tension, you know, that we see here. And I think specifically in verses 12 through 19, Tamar and Judah have sexual relations after his Canaanite wife passes away. So
Say it again.
Judah's Canaanite wife.
Oh, yeah. Judah's wife.
We don't know her name,
Yeah.
no.
but she passes away.
Yep.
And then Tamar and Judah. Now, if you guys are tracking with me, Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah, and they have sexual relations.
I mean, he doesn't know he's having sex with her.
Right. This
So-
is not
Right.
like
But
She said
she
she
knows,
took
but
off
he doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. She takes off
Because
her
she's-
little clothes.
she knows, yes.
She basically says, I need to have kids. In that culture, a woman without kids, you're nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so she, because she thinks, you know, Judah's never going to follow through and give me his third son,
right.
disguises herself as a prostitute. And again, Judah sees, and he knows, it's sad. It's almost like she knows her father-in-law well enough to know
Right. What he's gonna do.
What he's going to do if he sees her on the road there, dressed, disguised as a prostitute.
Yeah.
Now, there's all sorts of things in my mind, like, you know, was that a really dark tent they went into? I mean,
Right. Like how late in the day was it?
How do you not know?
How do you not know this is your daughter-in-law? But, you know, I mean, maybe he was
Especially when you
drinking.
start laying, like,
Yeah.
when you get into the thick of it, it's like, how do you not know then?
Yeah. Well,
But I mean, the text also says that she took off her widow's clothes, which is crazy. Like, I mean, when I think about that, like, how long did she actually have to go with just like
Waiting on them.
Yeah, with just the shame of like the culture.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she changed her clothes for a reason.
That's
you know
good.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. That's just something to kind of.
I wonder how do people, because you know how certain movies do really well at getting an audience to almost advocate for something that typically would be seen as wrong. It's you know what I mean? Like there's this moral dilemma.
like a
You're like-
taboo.
Right. But the way the story is written, the audience is supposed to in some way like understand. It's almost like the way they wrote Killmonger's character in
Black Panther.
Yeah.
Black Panther.
Yep.
Right by the end, you're like, oh,
Sympathetic to him.
I see why he did that. Right? You see
Yeah.
all the reasons why he went and did
Yeah.
what he did, the way he did it.
I think we could say the same thing for Tamar for
But
sure.
that's what I'm saying. I go, I'm interested to like hear that part of it and go, man, to think through that part,
Yeah.
to go, how long was she in widow's clothes? How long did she wait?
Yeah.
Judah was supposed to, again, out of his integrity, is supposed to be the patriarch of the society. You know, he makes his promise, and it seems like he's not going to keep it, and so she feels like I've got to
I gotta take matters in my own hands.
right,
I gotta take my own destiny type of situation.
right. And how do we not see that as like again? Because typically you read this story, and it's like, man, she, prostituted herself out, like she pimped herself out, just to get kids, but. Like to think about it another way and go like, man, like, what woman
In that culture,
does that become almost heroic? Does it? Like, is that what they're trying to write in some way?
well, it's actually pretty.
Because she ends up in the lineage.
Well, it's actually she doesn't. She does end up in the lineage, but it's actually interesting. Some commentaries actually do say that she's very heroic. some of the stuff I was reading.
See?
Some,
Has
not,
to
not
be,
all
though.
of
I'm
them.
not surprised.
Not all of them, but some of them did. And I was like, interesting.
I'm just not surprised by that. When you start to look at it from another side, you go, huh? If she ends up in the lineage, there was this promise that wasn't kept. In the story, Judah ends up saying she is more righteous than I. That's a big thing for a patriarch to say.
So that I was going to.
I mean, I'm getting ahead, but sorry.
Yeah.
No.
So rising tension, and then kind of like the resolution. Judah calls for Tamar's death because he finds out that she's pregnant by immorality, and he wants her burnt. But then she's vindicated of some type of way, right? Which is very interesting.
You are
in
the
itself.
father.
You are the father, right?
Here's the DNA.
That's right.
Like, you are the father.
This,
I should call this sermon "You Are the Father."
you are the father. Hey, seriously.
Hey.
But can we talk about though? Why is it that her sin is pointed out, but we don't talk about Judah's?
Well, I was going to get to that.
Okay, cool,
I was going to
cool.
get to that
Okay.
because,
Talk heavy.
well, before then, talk heavy. There you go. But before then, though, it's interesting because it's this little exchange. Going back to this transactional phrase that you said, right?
Yeah.
It's this exchange that happens with the signet and the cord, right? And if you remember, something interesting happened in Genesis 37 with the signet and the cord as well. You know what I'm talking about, Ramon?
With Joseph.
With Joseph.
Yeah.
So I just think there's an interesting connection there with this whole, with that. I think I got to dive more into that, but I think there's something there, some type of, what is that? But anyways, with that said, she is vindicated. In that though, verse 26, Judah does give a public confession. So at least in his eyes, he felt as though he was in the wrong.
Yeah, that's after though.
That is after.
That's what I'm saying. Like he was kind of like called out on it though.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But he was
For
about
sure.
to like burn this woman. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
But it's interesting if you look at Judah's story. It's almost like this is a turning point because before when we read about Judah, I mean, he's one of the guys most ready to like sell Joseph. Right?
Yep,
We see this. What he's willing to burn his daughter-in-law. But then the next time you see Judah later on, he's willing to. They're in Egypt. He doesn't know Joseph is the second in command there. He says basically, and Joseph is testing them. And Judah's the one who says, "Look, I'll stay here in prison and let my brothers go."
yeah.
Like he's willing to sacrifice himself.
Yeah.
So it's interesting just reading the different occasions what happened with Judah. It does seem like something given this last sort of statement from him, and next time we see him, he's way different than he was previously.
Yeah.
You wonder if like he realized some things that needed to change in his life.
Yeah.
Redemption.
And then the conclusion of this is the birth of twin boys, Perez and Zerah to Tamar and Judah. And I just Perez, sorry.
No, just that name because it comes up later in the.
It does come up, which is very we're going. I'll pass it to you when you get there because I think it's interesting. But if you notice, I don't know if there's anything here. This is just an observation, but I do think it's interesting that Judah, the narrative starts off with Judah having two sons, technically three, but two that dies, and then these twin boys.
I thought so too.
Come at the end of the conclusion.
Man,
I didn't want to do no allegory.
keep dropping them gems.
I'm just saying. I don't.
Hey,
It's an observation for now, but I mean,
Yeah.
I just think that's an interesting. Two of his sons dies. The Lord gives. The Lord takes away.
hey.
Lord restores. I mean, there's some stuff there. But
heavy.
you mentioned Perez. Was you gonna?
No, I was just saying. When you think about the genealogy, Perez is one of those names that stuck out to me.
Yeah.
So when the two
But it
sons,
gets into the
when you
lineage.
get to the genealogy,
Yeah.
Perez is one of those names when it starts to talk through.
Yeah.
Now I don't know how much are you about to break that down too? Because Perez technically is the one who was born first, but even though his sons or his brother like put his arm
Perez
out.
like peeked out and then
Yeah.
kind of played peekaboo. It's like
No, I think it was the other one. Yeah. He put his hand out and they put the
cord around.
Yeah,
him.
the cord around him, but then Perez is the one that came out. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. That is.
But
yeah.
they would have honored the one who came out first, right? Isn't that typically how it works?
Well, I'm not sure. I would have to.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. But there's a younger brother motif going on here, though. I think because
Yeah.
even when you look back, Jacob and Esau, and like there's this younger brother motif that probably good to even draw out too in the preaching. But yeah. So that's kind of the outline of it.
Okay.
Now, as we get into like how do we kind of preach it? Because is there this like one main point, one thread, one thorough line of some sort that kind of connects everything, or is it because like this could be? I feel like you're preaching philosophy. There's many different ways to preach a text, and this is one of them ones where I feel like obviously exegetically, biblically sound, all that type of stuff. We know that, but I do think there's a level of like emotion that I want to like. This is one of those passages I think people need to feel. If that makes sense.
That's true.
Yeah.
I think we want people to feel, the whole series, Love But Not Forgotten, through the lens of these women to sort of feel what that is. And so in many ways, typically I think we preach this passage, and it needs to be noted through Judah in the sense of, because Judah is through the line of Jesus. However, sort of to flip it, to think of what this woman went through and experienced. There's a verse I thought of in relation to this. So if we're going to see it through the lens of a Tamar, and really almost any of the women in a series, this is 1 Corinthians 1:28-29. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being may boast in the presence of God. He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, whom God made our wisdom and our righteousness and sanctification and redemption. I'm just really struck with this first story. Here's a woman who is low and despised. She's a widow. She's probably in the community. It's like, oh yeah, that's the woman who kills husbands, right?
Wow.
And then that's trifling.
And then she's pregnant, and then think of the whole process of them dragging her out. Well, we're gonna burn you, right? Just all that, right? Low and despised, and yet here we are talking about her. And the reason we're talking about her and know her story is because the Lord saw fit sovereignly to include her in his genealogy, which again is just something startling to think about. Like genealogy, typically, when they used to do genealogy back then, you highlight the heroes, the important people. You don't put the messed up people in your genealogy, right? And you don't put women in your genealogy.
I was about to say women too.
Right. And so it is unbelievable that the genealogy just goes out of its way to name her, and particularly in this story. And so that's a verse that especially comes to mind. I think God's delight, we can say, in choosing the stories that are kind of messed up, right?
Yeah.
And I think my question here is like, I don't know how to take what Judah says here. I maybe just toss this out there. Like, is what she did, was it right? Maybe it sort of just gets into ethics. In some ways it was right. In another way it wasn't right but she was forced to do it because of the importance of it's the messiness of sin, right? Yeah. And yet God uses it.
It is a narrative too. I think it's important out that like the author is just detailing what happened, right? This is what happened. He's just giving an account. It's not necessarily like, hey, you need to do this, right?
Well, the Torah is instruction.
That's true.
And this is a book of the Torah.
Correct.
So there's the story in some way that I imagine is supposed to be instructive. I don't know in every way. So right there are rabbis, there's a Talmud, there's stuff out there about people writing commentaries, and there are a lot of opinions about it. So I'm not dogmatic in any way about what we could make of the story.
Gotcha.
It's just interesting when I think about the characters of the story and what they did and what happened, right?
Totally.
Who was honored, who wasn't, how were the people honored? It's that sort of thing that doesn't necessarily make me say, oh, this is what you should do from an applicational standpoint. Like I would never say that in a sermon or in some sort of Bible study. But I think when you examine the story, there is a degree to where stories like this make me look at the world far more broadly, right? And so much in our history, especially with the way we've taught, we make things very, very black and white, like dogmatic, do this, don't do this. And those are very, very clear moments. But then when life is, right, when life happens and it is how it is, there's a degree to where you just go, oh, there's a reality to life that has far more rhythm to it, and certain things happen that aren't as easy to explain and aren't as easy to assess. Hey man, you're in sin, you're not in sin. And that language is in our culture so much, particularly in our Reformed circles or evangelical circles or seminary cultures or church circles, where people can be like, hey man, you're in sin, you're not in sin. Like somebody makes a decision because they feel they have to. And I feel like this is a story where you can have a bit more compassion that leads to, okay, I can see why that would happen. And then eventually, again, she ends up being honored in the story when you look at the grand scheme of it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Think about Hagar, in a situation where she's thrown out, literally. And the angel of the Lord appears to her, speaks to her, hears her, rewards. Like, you're like, man, it sounds like you got the good end of the deal. Like, you got to name the Lord? You did that? You got to see him and you still lived? Whereas other people, like, on accident in the story of the Old Testament, on accident try to do something right and they die.
Yeah.
Hagar gets to see him, talk to him, name him. Child is like blessed.
For sure.
It's those kind of things that makes you go, you know what? It expands my view of how I understand and start to interpret some of these stories.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, I think as we kind of probably come to a close regarding this, obviously this is just literally like a preview of foretaste of some of the things that I'm kind of working through and thinking through as I'm trying to prepare this. I think it's Advent series start, November 29th, I think?
Last Sunday in November.
Yeah, November 29th. So, I mean, I got a little bit of time, but I think this has been helpful. Obviously, I still got some ways to go, but appreciate you all for being able to help me out in this preaching collective and sermon prep and process.
Crystal, dropping them gems.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm just saying, hey, this is an important story.
Okay. I'm
This
with you.
comes from the Lion of Judah.
Okay. No
Like,
pressure on me.
If that didn't happen, then
Ooh,
what
okay.
what would we be singing? Not Lion of Judah. I'm just kidding. Lion of somebody.
Nice.
That's
All right, well, hopefully this was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love God, love people. We are out.